Hello everyone and welcome. Today I want to talk to you about a project that could truly change the way we use Linux, especially for those like me who love this operating system but occasionally need to use some Windows applications. The project is called WinBoat, and believe me, after studying it thoroughly, I can tell you it's one of the most interesting things I've seen lately in the Linux world. Before I begin though, I want to make a premise. How many of you have ever had to choose between using Linux or Windows because there was that single application, that single program you absolutely needed, but that only ran on Windows? Or how many of you still maintain a dual boot, restarting your computer every time you need to use Photoshop or Microsoft Office or some other professional software? Well, WinBoat might be the solution you've been waiting for years. Let's take a step back for a moment. Compatibility between Linux and Windows applications has always been one of the biggest challenges for Linux adoption as a desktop system. And don't get me wrong, incredible progress has been made over the years. We have Wine, which is an absolutely brilliant project, capable of running many Windows applications by translating API calls on the fly. Then there's Crossover, which takes Wine and adds a more user-friendly interface and commercial support. And of course, we've always had virtual machines like VirtualBox, VMware, or more recently, KVM. Each of these solutions has its merits, but also its drawbacks. Wine is fantastic for many applications, especially for older software or relatively simple programs. But when it comes to complex and modern software, things get complicated. The Adobe Suite, for example, is notoriously problematic. Affinity Photo and Designer, which are very valid alternatives to Adobe, don't run well on Wine. Even Microsoft Office, in its latest version with all its advanced features and macros, can cause problems. Traditional virtual machines work, sure. If you install VirtualBox and put Windows in it, you can run any Windows application you want. But there's a big problem: performance and integration. A virtual machine is heavy, consumes a lot of resources, RAM and CPU. And above all, there's no integration with your Linux desktop. You have to open a window that contains all of Windows, navigate the Windows Start menu, open the application, and then work in this separate window. It's not fluid, it's not elegant, and frankly, it's a bit inconvenient for daily use. And this is where WinBoat comes in. But what exactly is WinBoat? How does it work? And why should it be different from everything we've already tried? WinBoat is an application built with Electron, so it has a modern and attractive graphical interface, which uses Docker to run Windows in a container. Now before you think, so it's just another virtual machine, wait, because the real magic of WinBoat isn't so much in the virtualization itself as in the integration. WinBoat uses a technology called FreeRDP combined with Windows Remote App Protocol. For those who don't know, Remote App is a Windows feature that allows remote applications to run as if they were local. Normally, it's used in corporate environments to provide access to centralized software, but WinBoat exploits it brilliantly to do something completely different. In practice, when you open a Windows application through WinBoat, you don't see a virtual machine window with the Windows desktop inside. No. You see the single application that opens like a normal window on your Linux desktop. It has your title bar, your window decorations. It behaves exactly like a native application. You can put it in full screen, minimize it, move it between your virtual workspaces, everything you would normally do with any other Linux application. Imagine having Photoshop open with a simple click, and it appears as a normal window on your GNOME, KDE, or whatever desktop environment you're using. You can have Firefox open next to it, Visual Studio Code on the other side, and Photoshop running perfectly integrated. This is the level of integration that WinBoat offers. Now, one of the things that really impressed me about WinBoat is the attention the developers have placed on the user experience. Because let's face it, often in the Linux world, we're used to brilliant technical solutions, but complicated to configure. How many times have you had to modify configuration files, search for guides online, spend hours figuring out why something doesn't work? With WinBoat, the developers have tried to make everything as simple as possible. The Windows installation, which would normally be a long and tedious process, is completely automated. You open the WinBoat interface, choose your preferences, decide how much RAM to allocate, how much disk space to reserve, what specifications you want, and then let the system do everything else. You don't have to manually download the Windows ISO, you don't have to configure the virtual machine, you don't have to install drivers, you don't have to do anything. WinBoat takes care of everything. It downloads the correct Windows image, configures the Docker container, installs all necessary components, configures the network, mounts your file system, and prepares everything for you. When the process is finished, you have a Windows environment ready to use. The whole process took half an hour with my connection. And the interface? It's clean, modern, intuitive. You have a dashboard that shows you the status of your Windows environment, whether it's running or off, how many resources it's using, what applications you have installed. There's a real-time resource monitoring system, so you can see exactly how much CPU and RAM your Windows environment is consuming at any moment. If you notice it's using too many resources, you can easily shut it down when you don't need it and turn it back on when necessary. Let's now talk about a fundamental aspect of any virtualization solution: file sharing. Because it's no use having Windows running perfectly if your files are then trapped in a separate world, right? WinBoat solves this problem elegantly. Your Linux home directory is automatically mounted inside Windows. You don't have to configure anything. You don't have to manually create shared folders. It all happens automatically. This means that if you save a file from a Windows application, that file immediately appears in your Linux home directory, accessible from any native application. Think about the practical implications of this. You're working on a graphics project in Affinity Photo. You save your PSD file in the Documents folder. Immediately, you can open that file with GIMP to do some retouching, or upload it to your server using FileZilla or any other Linux FTP client, or share it through Dropbox or any cloud service you're using. There's no barrier, no intermediate step. It's all fluid and transparent. The same goes in reverse. You download a Word document from your email using Thunderbird on Linux, save it in the download folder, and you can immediately open it with Microsoft Office inside WinBoat to edit it with all the advanced features that only the Windows version of Office offers. This level of integration is really what makes the difference between a solution you use when you're forced to and a solution that becomes a natural part of your daily workflow. We now come to the million-dollar question: what really works with WinBoat? Because it's nice to talk about integration and elegant interfaces, but in the end, what matters is whether the applications we need run or not. The short answer is, practically everything that runs on Windows runs on WinBoat. But let's see some concrete examples that are particularly interesting. The Adobe Suite: Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, After Effects. All applications notoriously problematic on Wine, which require complicated configurations and often don't work perfectly anyway. With WinBoat, they work, period. Install Creative Cloud, download your applications, and they work exactly as they would on a native Windows machine. Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer, Affinity Publisher. These are very popular alternatives to Adobe, less expensive but equally powerful. These too are problematic on Wine. On WinBoat, no problem. Microsoft Office. I'm not talking about Office Online or older versions. I'm talking about the latest version of Office 365 with all its features. Macros, Power Query, integrations with other Microsoft services, everything works perfectly. Paint Tool SAI, software beloved by digital artists for its particularly fluid and natural brush engine, but historically a nightmare to run on Linux. On WinBoat it works without problems. And these are just a few examples. The point is that if an application runs on Windows, there's an excellent chance it will run perfectly on WinBoat too, without the need for hacks, workarounds, or special configurations. But WinBoat doesn't stop at basic features. The developers have implemented several advanced features that really show how mature this project is, despite still being in beta. One of the most interesting features is USB Passthrough, introduced from version 0.8.0. What does this mean? It means you can connect USB devices to your Linux computer and have them recognized directly by Windows inside WinBoat. Why is this important? Well, think about all those devices that need specific Windows software. Professional graphics tablets that require Windows drivers to configure custom buttons and pressure sensitivity. Audio mixers that have control software available only for Windows. Security devices like smart card readers that require specific drivers. With WinBoat, you can use all these devices without problems. And speaking of smart cards, WinBoat also supports smart card pass-through, which is essential for those who work in corporate environments that require this type of authentication to access internal systems or digitally signed documents. There's also a very detailed resource monitoring system. You can see in real time how much CPU your Windows environment is using, how much RAM it's consuming, how much disk space it's occupying. This is useful not only for optimizing performance, but also for understanding when it's time to allocate more resources, or conversely, when you can reduce them to leave more space for native Linux applications. Now, it would be dishonest of me to paint WinBoat as the perfect solution to all problems. Like any technology, it has its limitations, and I think it's important to talk about them openly. First of all, WinBoat is currently in beta. This isn't just a legal disclaimer, it's a concrete reality. During testing, several users have reported bugs and problems. Sometimes applications don't start. Sometimes opening a new application while another is already open, the first window mysteriously disappears. There are occasional crashes, strange behaviors, things that don't work as they should. The developers are transparent about this and are actively working to solve these problems. But if you're the type of person who needs a rock-solid, super stable solution that you can rely on for critical work, maybe it's better to wait a few more versions before taking the big leap. Let's then talk about gaming. If you're thinking, great, finally I'll be able to play all my Windows games on Linux, I have to give you bad news. Games with kernel-level anti-cheat won't work. Games like Valorant, League of Legends with Vanguard, many modern competitive games don't run on WinBoat. Why? Because these anti-cheat systems detect virtualization and actively block it, assuming it's a cheating attempt. For gaming on Linux, solutions like Proton through Steam, Lutris, or Heroic Games Launcher still remain the best choice. WinBoat is designed more for productive applications, professional software, not for competitive gaming. Another important limitation is the absence of dedicated GPU acceleration. At the moment, there's no support for full GPU pass-through. The developers are exploring various options, such as para-virtualized drivers in the Looking Glass project, but for now it's not available. This means that applications that require very high graphics performance, such as three-dimensional rendering software or heavy video editing, might not perform at their best. From a technical requirements standpoint, there's an aspect that could be an obstacle for some users. WinBoat requires Docker, and specifically doesn't support Docker Desktop. You need to install and configure Docker via terminal. For those already familiar with Docker, this isn't a problem, but for less technical users, for those who are new to Linux, it could be intimidating. The documentation helps, there are guides available, but it's still a step that requires a minimum of technical competence. That said, once Docker is configured correctly, everything else is managed through the WinBoat graphical interface. You don't have to touch the terminal anymore, you don't have to write commands, everything is point and click. But that initial step remains a small barrier to entry. The developers are aware of this problem. They're working on a Flatpak version that could significantly simplify installation. Flatpak is a package format that isolates applications but also makes them very easy to install. You click, install, it works. However, creating a Flatpak for WinBoat is complicated because WinBoat needs to access Docker, expose installed applications, interact with various parts of the system. It's not impossible, but it requires work. It's in the plans, but for now it's not yet available. Many of you will be wondering, how does WinBoat position itself compared to other existing solutions? Let's make some direct comparisons. Compared to Wine or Crossover, WinBoat offers much broader compatibility. If an application doesn't work on Wine, it will probably work on WinBoat because you're running real Windows, not an implementation of the APIs. The trade-off is that WinBoat uses more resources because you're effectively running a complete operating system. Compared to traditional virtual machines like VirtualBox, WinBoat offers much better integration. Applications appear as native windows. You automatically share the file system. The experience is much more fluid. Performance is comparable, but usability is definitely superior. Then there's WinApps, another project that tries to solve the same problem. WinApps is interesting, but requires much more manual configuration. With WinApps, you do most of the setup by hand, modify configuration files, use terminal commands. WinBoat instead automates everything. There's a cohesive graphical interface that brings everything together, and the experience is much more user-friendly. One aspect I want to emphasize is that WinBoat is completely open source, released under the MIT license. This is fantastic for several reasons. First, it's free. You don't pay anything, no license, no subscription. Second, you can see the source code, understand exactly what it does, contribute if you have the skills. Third, you don't depend on a company that might decide to abandon the project or change business models. The developers are active on GitHub, where you can report bugs, request features, contribute with pull requests. There's also a very active Discord community where you can chat with developers and other users, ask questions, share your experience. Looking to the future, there are several interesting things in the pipeline. In addition to the already mentioned Flatpak version, they're working on support for Podman as an alternative to Docker. Podman is more modern, more secure, and doesn't require root privileges, which would be a big advantage. At the moment, there are technical problems to solve, particularly with networking, but it's in the plans. There's also ongoing exploration of solutions for GPU acceleration. This could really change the game if they manage to implement it well. Imagine being able to use Premiere Pro or Blender on Windows with full GPU acceleration. It would be incredible. So we arrive at the final question. Is it worth trying WinBoat? My answer is, it depends on your needs. If you're professionals who use Linux as your main system but need specific Windows applications for your work, WinBoat might be exactly what you were looking for. Graphics professionals, designers, people who work with proprietary corporate software available only for Windows, WinBoat can really simplify your life. If you're thinking of switching completely to Linux, but there's that single Windows application that keeps you tied, WinBoat might be the solution that finally allows you to make the big leap. You don't have to maintain a dual boot anymore. You don't have to restart every time. You can have the best of both worlds. On the other hand, if you're mainly a gamer, or if you need extreme graphics performance, or if you want something extremely stable and mature for critical use, maybe WinBoat isn't ready for you yet. But it's definitely worth keeping an eye on because it's evolving rapidly. Personally, I find WinBoat an extremely promising project. It represents that kind of pragmatic innovation that I like. It takes existing technologies, combines them in intelligent ways, and solves a real problem that many people have. It's not perfect, but it's on the right track. And the fact that it's open source, free, and with an active community means it has all the credentials to become ever better. In 6 months, in a year, WinBoat could be the standard solution for running Windows applications on Linux. I'm quite convinced of that. So if you're curious, if you find yourself in the situation of needing Windows applications while using Linux, I recommend you try WinBoat. Maybe test it with non-critical applications first, familiarize yourself with the interface, see how it behaves on your system. But I believe many of you will be pleasantly surprised. In my Beyond Windows video, I had indicated among the main limitations in switching to Linux, precisely the impossibility of using certain applications. And I believe that this solution, even if still in beta phase, finally manages to bridge that gap that has existed since the very birth of Linux. It's no small thing. It's a real revolution that concretely solves an accessibility problem that many users have always perceived. I really hope this project gets supported, grows and improves more and more, because finally we've done it. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.